Hello class, and welcome back to 3D modeling animation. Today I want to cover a bit of 3D basics and a little bit of Blender basics. To begin, I want to cover some basic terminology so that when we start talking about the different features of 3D models, 3D animation, we're using the same kind of jargon, the same techno-babble or industry terms that you'd expected to know about if you were going to speak intelligently about this field. So let's jump right into it. Let's first start talking about the vertex. So this vertex, or vertices in plural. I think that's how I spell that. No, it does not like that. I'm forgetting an R. There, now it looks better. Vertex and vertices. These are non-existent as far as the render is concerned. These are merely reference points in 3D space. We attribute them with an X, a Y, and a Z in 3D space. So there's an X-axis, a Y-axis, and a Z-axis. If you think back to your high school geometry class with a Cartesian grid with X and Y, in 3D space we merely have one more dimension, the Z. If you've played Minecraft, you're probably used to the XZ plane being where you live on, and up and down, up a mountain or down into a cave will be your Y. Just so you know, that is a choice that was made by Mojang. It is not necessarily a standard. A lot of 3D modeling applications will use Z as the up axis and X and Y as the horizontal plane within which we work. There is another concept called an edge. So let's label this thing. This is an edge. This is a point connecting two vertices. Again, edges generally don't get rendered unless it's being used in some kind of special effect like pathing or using to trace out some kind of node graph to procedurally generate vines or trees or cities or however it's going to be used. But generally, these are just a connection line between two vertices. Now, finally, we get to what are called faces. And these are defined specifically with triangles. That spelling would be nice, known as a tri. Or tries. And then over here we have quadrilaterals. Quads. When we're working with 3D modeling tools and modifiers, we generally like to work in quads. There's a lot of math that lets you subdivide and apply special effects that work better when we're dealing with quadrilaterals and don't work as well as triangles. But ultimately, your graphics card, your GPU, your NVIDIA, your ATI, your onboard Intel, is going to take that quad data and break it down into two triangles. And if you can see, any quad, if you connect the diagonal, is now split into two triangles. Just so you know that that's what's going on eventually. This class is designed to teach people how to make 3D models that will ultimately be used for video games, virtual reality, simulation, live application. And most live applications will require your geometry data to be stored in triangles. Just something to keep aware of. Tris and quads are both considered faces. They do get rendered. But certain math works better in quadrilaterals, which is why we generally work in quads and then export in triangles. All right, so this is our basic vocabulary. Let's take a look at that Blender now. Whoop, here, Blender. This is Blender 3.1, the default one that came with my version of Ubuntu. I mentioned in the class Discord how they have now released 4.0. I have not messed with 4.0 yet. I don't know how much of the interface has changed. I don't know how stable it is. I've heard some reports that they're still dealing with some stability. So to keep things simpler, and the fact that most of it is going to be backward compatible anyway. I'm going to be working in Blender 3.0. I also mentioned that version 2.7 and earlier has a different input scheme. I've just reset my Blender to use the modern input scheme, the one that's became standard in 3.0. But I'm going to probably move mine into 2.7 key bindings because I have 20 years of muscle memory that I'm not going to override over the course of this semester. So I'm going to do my best to explain what the hotkeys are that are common. And if you'd like to switch to the older input model, which arguably is not as good, but I think it has less layers of menu access, which makes your modeling processes faster, in my opinion, even if they are a little counterintuitive. So this is the Blender interface. We've got our main screen here. Something I don't know if this screen capture is going to show well enough is the difference in highlight depending on where my mouse currently is. So Blender has mouse context. So whatever panel my mouse is over will get the focus. And you can see there's a slight difference in highlighting between when my mouse is over this 3D view window, this editor 3D viewport, or this timeline viewport down here. Whichever one my mouse is over is going to get any kind of keyboard hotkey input. Now the default is left click selects. And while I'm in object mode, note that there's more than one option, more than one mode in Blender. There's object mode, edit mode, sculpt mode, vertex paint, weight paint, and texture paint. All these fun modes that are all relative to working with 3D geometry. However, if I have a different type of object selected, so here I have a light selected, I don't have any other options. There's nothing to do with lights. And the camera also doesn't have anything else. So it's going to be context dependent. There are other objects that we can add that will have different contexts. Later in the semester, we'll deal with armatures that have a pose mode and an edit mode in addition to the object mode. But object mode is the umbrella mode that lets us select between different objects. Now, I want to point out that the pink line here, this magenta, is the x-axis. The green line there is the y-axis, and not shown is a blue vertical, which is the z-axis. If you middle mouse button click, and just a note, if you're doing this on a laptop, you are going to need a full mouse for this class. It is possible to do work with just the touchpad. It is unfortunately going to be an absolute nightmare trying to get any work done without having more options available to you that a mouse provides. So I'm using a 3-button wheel mouse, generic, no burnt named mouse that I just dusted off. Middle mouse click lets you rotate and pan around the center point. Now, something else I want to point out. See that little thing there, the little reticle? It looks like a red and white lifesaver and a little crosshair. That is the 3D cursor. Not to be confused with your mouse cursor, that is a 3D cursor. When I do certain commands in the 3D world, some things are going to be relevant relative to that cursor. Where I add new objects, where I add new vertices or geometry, that is where that is going to happen at that cursor. In my other, I don't know off the top of my head how to move that specifically. It's probably a modifier, or maybe I can select it. No. Figure that out later. But for now, middle click pans. Scroll wheel zooms in and zooms out. And this is just my viewport. Doesn't actually move the camera. This thing is the camera. This is where rendering is going to happen. If you click over here on this right panel, you got this little render properties. You can set different rendering engines. So Blender comes with, at least this version came with 3 different rendering engines. Eevee is its default. Workbench is some other one that they've included, and Cycles is like an older version. Now, the cool thing about Eevee is that generally their renders are much nicer looking with the Eevee engine. However, Cycles has a lot more additional features that might be useful while building your models and texturing them and animating them. Particularly, I will use cycles mostly when I'm creating assets for a game that I'm working on. But for now, I'm leaving it on Eevee. If you go to the next one, the little printer icon, this is the output properties. We can set the resolution for what we're going to render. If we're doing animation, our start frame and our end frame, what our frame rate is, we can adjust that. Our output color depth, we can make black and white images, red, green, blue, include the alpha channel. Stereoscopy, if you want to create like a like a double image so that you can use something with a stereogram or see it in a VR set. So that's something you can mess with here as well. And the big old render button, which used to actually be a button, but the hotkey for rendering is still F12. So if you hit F12 on your keyboard, it will render what the camera is looking at. So there's the default Blender cube closed down. So that will render based on what this light sees. Now let me take a look at, or show you, one of the first things we need to do is learning some of the other basic actions to do things. Now some of these commands will work in both object mode and edit mode. For instance, if I want to rotate what I have selected, I can hit the R hotkey, R for rotate, and now I'm rotating the object that I have selected. Now note it is rotating around the center line of my camera. If that makes any sense. Not that camera, my view camera. So wherever I'm viewing it from, if I hit R, I will rotate around that center point. But my placement of my camera is not very precise, so I don't want you to try to like line up the camera to the point where I can't see the y-axis anymore. It becomes very difficult. There's a hotkey to snap a rotation to a specific axis if that's what I need. I can rotate and I can hit the key Y and I've locked it to just the y-axis. Or I can switch it to X and now I'm rotating around the x-axis, and then Z around the z-axis. Now if I want to move something around, I can grab it with G to grab. And again, I'm moving it in the plane described by how my viewport is seeing things. So you can see my X, Y, and Z in the top left corner up here. Oh, no, I can't. Let me cancel that. This gets replaced when I hit rotate with how many degrees of rotation. Or if I'm grabbing the delta X, delta Y, and delta Z of the position of the object. Now notice, as I'm moving this around, there is a little yellow dot at the center of the object. That is the object's center, quote unquote. It is a reference point for the object regardless of what the object is. Everything has it. So if I select the camera, you can see the little dot shows up there. That's the center point of the camera. By the way, if I rotate the camera, and then I hit render, my camera is no longer pointed at anything. All right, undo. Control Z still undoes. Control Shift Z redos. So it's not Control Y, it's Control Z, Control Shift Z to undo and redo. But note, this camera has now been moved and rotated in space. If I want to move this camera relative to its local space, I can say grab, and I want to lock it to the Z-axis, so now I'm moving the camera up and down. But if I hit Z again, I'm now moving on the camera's local Z-axis. So that was the camera's original Z. When I made the camera brand new, it was pointed straight down. I didn't, it came with default, but in theory, if I made a new camera, it would be pointed straight down. And so that is why the camera's Z is there. Or if I wanted to grab it and move it along the camera's X-axis, I hit X twice, and now I'm moving it along the camera's X-axis. And I render that again. You can see I've moved it off to the side. I'm going to undo that again. The light source here, I guess it does have it has been rotated, which doesn't make any damn sense, but whatever. It's just a point. Yeah, there are other light types that would need a direction. There are hemisphere lights and spotlights. This is an area light, which shoots light out in all directions. I'm going to go over the different light types in a future video. All right. So There's one more basic tool I want to talk about, and that is scale. Doesn't always make sense depending on which context we're dealing with. But in this case, scale is S. And now I can scale the object. But I can also limit this to scale in just one direction. For instance, if I want to scale in the x-axis, now and I'm just making it wider or thinner along that axis, or y, or z. Or I can combine, or I can do two at the same time by doing not of the one I don't want to deal with. So for instance, if I want to do not the x-axis, I hold shift and hit X, and now I'm scaling in just the ZY plane. And I'm not scaling in the X, or shift Y, and now I'm not scaling in the Y axis, but I am scaling in the Z and the X axis. Or, and I really need to pronounce this correctly, the not Z axis, which is just scaling in the X and Y plane. Those are the basic movements. To reiterate, we have R to rotate, G to grab, S to scale. And by the way, what I'm doing to cancel an action in the process is right-click cancels. If I scale and I want to keep the scaling, left-click confirms the change. For instance, if I want to select the camera again, and I want to grab it and move it up, left-click confirms, and then I'm going to rotate it along its x-axis to point it back down, and left-click confirms, and I can hit F12 again. I can render what I've looked at there. That's the basics. Something else to be aware of. If you are on a keyboard that comes with a laptop that does not have a number pad, it is sometimes handy to enable numpad emulation. What does that mean? Well, Blender has some hotkeys that kind of work well with the layout of a number pad. I'm going to go to File, Edit, Preferences, and I'm going to go to Key Mapping, not Key Mapping, Interface, or Key Map. I always forget where these things are because I basically do them once and then never look at them again. No, it isn't. Here we are, under Input. If you're not using a 3-button mouse, you can try to make it emulate a 3-button mouse. If you don't have a number pad on your keyboard, you can have it emulate a number pad on your keyboard. Since I am currently on a laptop without a number pad, I'm going to enable this. If you are working on a keyboard with a number pad, then the commands I'm about to tell you should be done on the number pad, not on the number row on the regular part of your keyboard. These are presets for the different views of your 3D space. So the one preset that's important to know is number pad 0. Shows you what the camera is looking at. The cool thing about this view is if I have the camera selected, which I do, which you can see whatever is selected is in orange, I can grab it and I can move it and it updates the view. So I can see exactly what I want my camera to look at and adjust it accordingly with number pad 0. And if I want to break out of it, all I have to do is start panning, and now I'm no longer looking at it and no longer locked to it. Number pad 5 is one that always messes people up. You generally don't need to worry about this unless you've screwed up. There is a difference between perspective view. Notice how things in a distance get closer together and things that are closer to you get farther apart. This is how perspective in life works. There is another way of looking at the 3D space. It is called orthogonal. Hitting number pad 5, will move it to an orthogonal space. If you look at a classic 3/4 view isometric 2D game where it's trying to fake 3D space, it is likely drawn in an orthogonal way. Notice all the skewed rectangles here are the same shape and size of the skewed rectangles here, regardless of distance. This means things do not scale with distance. This is not how we see world, but it is sometimes handy to look at when we're trying to make sure things line up right. But if you ever get in a weird view, and it can be weird and hard to understand what you're looking at sometimes when you're accidentally in orthogonal view, like the default icon for Minecraft is a cube drawn in orthogonal view, like that. But number pad 5 puts us back into perspective view, which is what we're more likely to be used to working in. All right, so there's other views to look at too. So number pad 1 puts you in the front view. So I am looking down the y-axis. I have the x, and then I have the z. Then number pad 3 gets me the side view. I am looking down the x-axis. I see the vertical z and the horizontal y. You can see this as shows you a little visual of it as well. If, by the way, you see one of these, where is it? Transform ball. No. I turned it off. There is, no, not you. Sometimes you'll see some reference lines around your object. That is meant to be an ease of use feature. I find it gets in the way more than it helps. So I've turned that off. I believe I turned it off by one of these side buttons here. I just go to the select box. That's all I want. I just want select mode. And there's how I move the cursor. If you hit Shift S, you can also control the cursor. If this cursor gets out of the line for some reason, like you're in cursor select mode and you don't want to be, and you forgot and you messed it up, and like, how do I get it back? Shift S calls up the context menu to control the cursor. And right now I want to snap that cursor back to the world origin. Cursor to world origin. And now it's back where I want it to be. Sometimes I want it to a specific spot, which is why that's handy. You will see me when I'm working in future tutorials, when I've moved the key bindings back to the way I'm used to it, where that control is done with the left mouse button. I can see why they changed that one. It is not necessary to move it that often. And my right click is select. But here left click is select. All right. Now that you know these hotkeys to go between the different views. And then 2 and 4, if I'm in, will rotate out, and 6, 8. So it's 2 and 8 are opposite on the number pad. They rotate vertically. And 4 and 6 are opposite number pad. They rotate horizontally. And then 1, 3, 7, and the fun one, what the camera's looking at. Now I find these to be so useful. I oftentimes want them to be my primary view setup. I want to see all 4 of them at the same time. The cool thing about Blender is that I can customize my interface. If I move my mouse cursor, not to be confused with the world cursor, to the edge of my view screen and something else, I can see that my cursor changes into an up-down arrow, which I guess doesn't do anything here. But I can right-click here, and I can split my view. Now, if I hold Control, it'll snap to different sizes, but I can split it in half. Now I've got 2 views. I'm going to split it in half again, horizontally. And I'm going to split this one again, horizontally. Now I've got 4 views. Notice as I move my mouse between the different views, one gets the highlight and the rest of them don't. So for this one, I want 1, I want 3, I want 7, and whatever the camera is looking at here. So camera view, top-down view, right view. Oh, one of these was supposed to be the side view. There it is. So top, front, and side view of my object. I find this to be a good preset. Now, if you like this preset, Blender generally always defaults to a cube with one big panel and the default key set. You can, as it defaults, you can save this as your startup file. So that'll always start up like this. I've already done that, so I'm not going to bother doing that now. In fact, if I were to kill Blender and restart it, it would look like this for me. Let's dig in a little deeper, because I want to come full circle back to the slideshow. If I hit Tab, or I go to this menu here, I will go into edit mode. Tab's a nice little toggle because it usually goes from whatever mode you're in to object mode, and then to the most common context mode for whatever you have selected. For 3D meshes, which is what this is referring to as, edit mode is the most common thing. Now you can see we have selected the cube. And by the way, to select all or to deselect all is the letter A. No, Shift A. No, Control A. Alt A. Alt A. Alt A selects nothing. A selects all. Oh no, it was toggling. It was just lagging. So A selects all. A again will deselect all. Or I guess it's Alt A deselects all. If I have things selected, I select between them with a mouse click. If I hold Shift, I can add to the selection. And if I hit something I already have selected, I will deselect from that selection. A, Alt A. Okay. Alt A deselects all, A selects all. It is sometimes handy to clear your selection from every now and then. Now the commands I gave you earlier, by the way, now that we have this split screen, I notice I'm now using a quarter of the space I had for this before. If I want to expand it, nope, it's Control Spacebar. Yes, Control Spacebar will full screen a panel. Hitting it again will toggle it back. It's whatever my mouse happens to be over. So if my mouse is over this panel, I can full screen this panel, or this panel, or the timeline, or this panel. You get the point. Let me click expand this panel so I can focus. Being able to control spacebar into it makes this scene, this layout much more helpful, in my opinion. Now the cool thing about Blender is it's customizable to you. As you start to work, you might find you have a workflow that works better for you that's different from this. Go ahead. It's make sure the tool works for you and that you're not fighting it. All right, now with this selected, I'm going to select some vertices and show you that the commands that I already taught you to grab still apply in different axes. Again, right-click cancels, grab Z, left-click confirms. Control-Z undoes, Control-Shift-Z redoes. Undoes, undoes, undoes. English is weird. I can rotate. And again, it's rotating around my view axis, or the Z-axis. I can twist the cube. And just a reminder that as long as it can get away with it, Blender defaults to working with quads, not triangles. Why does that make it weird sometimes? If I just select this one vertex and I hit grab and Z and I lift this up, how should it draw this now oblique cube? Does it make this an axis or does it make that an axis? Blender has chosen that's my axis. But if I select that cube, that vertex, and I lift it up and I look at it, so Blender has chosen this is the axis that is the real edge, and this one is not. Sometimes that can make things look a little weird. But going back to what I was saying, scale S still applies. Lock to just the x-axis, lock to just the y-axis. So grab, rotate, scale. All still work. There's another one that is going to be useful. This only really works in certain contexts. In this case, in edit mode, the context is extrude, E-X-T-R-U-D-E, and when I hit E, it makes more geometry based on what I have selected, connects it to what I had selected, and then pulls it out. So I can select, I can extrude, I can select, I can extrude, and then extrude and scale. And something else to point out, there is different ways we can view the world. Right now I'm in flat shaded mode. If you look at the top right here, we've got viewport shading, we've got wireframe, flat, shaded, and or textured. And then the last one is live rendering, which will actually use lighting and show you where everything is based in the scene. This can look pretty, but you can see it's doing live shadowing. It's doing a lot of work. It is slower and more likely to cause a crash. Even using the textures, there's no textures mapped here. It doesn't make sense to even work in this. These two, wireframe and flat shade, are the ones you're going to want to do most of your work in. Now, as we start making things that are more complicated, sometimes I want to make sure that I'm only selecting what I'm seeing. So I've got another tool, the circle tool, C. I can paint selection, or I can hold shift and I can unpaint my selection. And there's R, shift R, alt R. I don't know the command now. I'll have to look that up. Select. Cool thing about Blender, if I select a menu, box select. I don't know what tweak left is, but whatever your hotkey is that's selected appears in the light gray text on the right hand side for the command. Not everything has a hotkey, but if you find there's a tool that you use frequently, you can go ahead and customize that in the preferences menu that I showed you earlier. Anyway, let's deselect all. Box or circle select. Scrolling the mouse wheel will increase the size of my selection brush. And so here I've selected everything that I saw. Now notice that vertex and all the vertices behind it were not selected. However, if I'm in wireframe view, by the way, Z is the hotkey to select different modes. I'm going to go back to wireframe. Now if I do C and I start painting, I select through based on what I see. So in flat or solid view, I only select what I see. Actually, technically you always only select what you see, because in flat shade solid view, you don't see what's behind it. This will help make your life just a little bit easier. All right, these are the basics on Blender. I'm going to end this video here. I'm going to make another one as soon as I can that will go through the basics of modeling some basic prop. Until then, fire up Blender, start messing around with it, and see what you can come up with and get familiar with it. Don't forget to save your work, because Blender does crash. So save as. Blender saves as a blend file, and will also save a blend1 file. That is a backup file in case the first file gets corrupted. And it's always one save behind, just in case, because things crash. All right, thanks for watching. See you in Discord.